My parents threw me out because I got a job and could no longer be the free nanny for their 4 kids. Then they told the whole family I walked out on my own. So I dug up the secret they had buried for years. The first thing my mother said when I told her I got a job was not congratulations. It was, and who was going to watch the kids now? I was 17. I had been raising my 4 younger siblings since I was 12, cooking their dinners, walking them to school, sitting up with them when they had fevers, all of it for free. And the one time I tried to build something of my own, my parents looked at me like I had done something unforgivable. I told them the job was only 4 evenings a week at a hardware store, that I could still watch the kids in the mornings and on the weekends. My father laughed the way he laughed whenever he decided I was being stupid. A real man puts his family first, he said. You do not get to be selfish and walk out on the people who put food in your mouth. I told him I was not walking out on anyone. That was when he told me to pack a bag. I thought he was bluffing. He was not. By 2 in the morning, we were still going in circles. My mother was crying at the kitchen table, and I made the mistake of thinking for one stupid second that she was crying because of me. She was not. She was crying because a real babysitter for 4 kids costs money, and she said that number out loud twice like it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to her. My father stood by the front door with his arms crossed like a bouncer at a club that had already decided not to let me in. I reminded him, because I could not stop myself, of the summer I was 14 and made a soccer team and had to quit it in the second week because there was no one else to pick the twins up from daycare. I reminded him of the school trip I missed, the sleepovers I turned down, the 2 years I stopped being invited to anything at all because everyone learned that the answer was always no. He told me those were the sacrifices a family makes, as if he had ever made one. Then I asked him, so who is going to pay for college, since you always told me that was on me and me alone? He said that was exactly the kind of ungrateful mouth that got me thrown out in the first place. Then he opened the door, picked up a garbage bag he had already filled with my clothes while I was still arguing, set it out on the porch, and told me to figure it out. I stood there in the cold in a t-shirt, 17 years old, and for the first time in years, I let myself actually feel it. Not the anger, the other thing underneath the anger. The quiet, bottomless understanding that I was never going to get a version of my parents who loved me more than they loved what I did for them. I did not wipe my face. I just looked at them one more time, my mother not even lifting her head, my father already reaching to close the door, and I picked up the bag. My father did not offer to drive me anywhere. He tossed a spare key onto the porch, told me my cousin Becca could deal with me now, and shut the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt turn. Then the porch light went off, and I was standing in the dark of the only house I had ever lived in, with everything I owned in a plastic bag, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Becca was my mother's niece, 10 years older than me, quiet in a way that made people forget she was in the room. She was the kind of person who apologized to furniture when she bumped into it. She lived across town in a small apartment above a laundromat, and I walked most of the way and caught a night bus for the rest. The bag on my lap, the driver glancing at me in his mirror like he was deciding whether to ask. He did not ask. I watched my own reflection in the black window the whole way, a 17-year-old boy with everything he owned in a plastic bag, and I kept waiting to feel embarrassed. Instead, all I felt was a strange, light emptiness, like a hand had finally let go of the back of my neck after holding it there for years. I did not have a plan. I did not have a phone that would work by morning, or a dollar that was truly mine, or the first idea what I was going to do. But for the length of that one bus ride, in the dark, headed somewhere I had not chosen, I was, for the first time I could remember, not responsible for a single soul, but myself. I did not know yet whether that was freedom or just falling. It turned out to be both. When Becca opened her door at almost 3 in the morning and saw me standing there holding a garbage bag, her whole face changed. She did not ask a single question. She pulled me inside, sat me down on her couch, and made tea I did not drink. That was the first time in longer than I could remember that someone had been gentle with me for no reason at all, and it broke something loose in my chest. I started crying, and I could not stop. When I finally ran out of tears, Becca sat down next to me and said very carefully that my mother had already called her about an hour before I even arrived. That my parents had told her I had been acting out for months, that I was lazy and entitled and refused to lift a finger around the house, and that they had finally reached their limit and had no choice but to let me go. She watched my face the whole time she said it. I must have looked like I had been slapped because she stopped and said, "That is not what happened, is it?" So I told her. All of it. The years of it. I told her about the friends I stopped seeing because I always had to be home. The grades I let slide because I was up half the night with a coughing toddler. The morning I did the twins' hair with one hand while spooning cereal into the baby with the other. At 6 6 in the morning on a school day at 14 years old. The parent-teacher night no one came to because I was the parent, sitting across from my own teacher, explaining my own absences. I told her about the Christmas I spent alone with all 4 kids while my parents drove 6 hours to a wedding because paying a sitter over the holiday was out of the question when they had me for nothing. I told her about the night the baby ran a fever of 104, and I sat on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning reading about seizures on my phone because my parents had turned their ringers off and told me never to wake them over nothing. I told her I had a folder on my laptop full of college brochures I had secretly saved and never once opened again. After my father told me when I was 15 that dreamers only ended up disappointed and that I should learn a trade and stop putting on airs, she held my hand through all of it and told me I was safe under her roof. She did not seem angry exactly. She seemed like she was quietly deciding something, and I was too tired to ask what. I cried myself to sleep on that couch and did not wake up until I heard Becca's voice through the wall, sharp and low. Nothing like the soft way she normally talked. She was on the phone. I could not make out the words, but I could hear the shape of them, the way you can hear a fight even through a wall. It went on for a while. Then I heard her hang up, and because she thought I was still asleep, she said one thing out loud to the empty room, half to herself. She said, "They had someone lined up the whole time." I did not move. I lay there with my eyes open in the dark and let it land on me slowly, like cold water soaking through a shirt. My parents had not thrown me out in a moment of rage. They had already found my replacement, a neighbor's daughter it turned out, a girl 2 streets over who they had quietly arranged to babysit for cheap, and the arrangement had been made weeks before I ever said the word job. The job was not the reason. The job was the excuse. They had wanted me gone, and they had simply been waiting for a clean way to make it look like my fault. I should have felt destroyed. Instead, something in me went very calm and very cold, calmer than I had felt in years. If my parents wanted to tell the whole family a story where I was the villain who abandoned 4 little kids, then I was going to tell the true one, and I was going to make it impossible for anyone to look away from it. The problem was that a story is only a story. When it is a teenager's word against 2 parents, people believe the parents. They always believe the parents. I needed proof, and I did not have any. Not yet. 2 days later, Becca handed me something that changed the entire shape of what was coming. She had gone back to the house that afternoon while my parents were at work to get the rest of my things before they decided to throw them out too. She still had a key. She had let herself into my father's home office to look for my documents, and she came back to the apartment with a folder tucked under her arm and a strange look on her face. Inside were the ordinary things: my birth certificate, my social security card, an old immunization record. But underneath those was a thick stack of bank statements she had photographed on her phone, page after page, because a line item had caught her eye and then would not let go of it. For 6 years, my grandparents, my father's own mother and father, had been sending a transfer on the 1st of every month into my parents' account. Every single statement had the same note in the memo line, written in my grandfather's careful, old-fashioned hand. For Nolan, college. 6 years of it, 12 months a year, never missed. Money that had been meant for me. Money I had never seen a single cent of. Money my parents had spent, month after month, while looking me in the eye across the dinner table and telling me that college was my problem to solve alone. I sat on Becca's floor and did the math out loud like an idiot, again and again, because I could not make myself believe the number. It was not a small number. It was the number that would have changed my entire life, and they had eaten it quietly for 6 years and let me believe I was worthless the whole time. I kept thinking about all the nights I had done the math on community college and given up, all the times I had quietly decided that people like me simply did not get to go, while the answer to every one of those nights had been sitting in a desk drawer under my father's coffee mug the entire time. There was worse in the folder too. Becca had photographed a birthday card, still in the drawer, that my grandmother had mailed 2 years back with a note asking my parents to please pass along her love and the check inside to me, because she never seemed to reach me on the phone anymore. I had never gotten that card. I had never gotten any of them. My parents had been quietly telling my grandparents that I was doing great, that I had everything I needed, that I was just a busy teenager who did not call much, while cashing every check my grandparents sent for me. Becca watched me put the pieces together and said softly that she had almost not taken the pictures, that she had felt like she was snooping. I told her she had just handed me the truth. Then I told her exactly what I was going to do with it. Every family has that one person who could not hold a secret if their life depended on it. In mine, it was my Uncle Ronnie, my mother's younger brother, who treated every scrap of family news like breaking headlines and forwarded everything he ever heard to everyone he had ever met. I sat up most of the night writing writing the message. I put everything in it. The years of unpaid work that had cost me my childhood, the soccer team, the missed trips, the 6 in the morning with a baby on my hip, the eviction at 2 in the morning with my clothes in a garbage bag on the porch, the replacement babysitter they had lined up before they ever threw me out, which proved the whole thing was planned in cold blood. And then, at the very bottom, I attached the photographs. 6 years of transfers. For Nolan. College. All of it gone. The card my grandmother sent that I never saw. It was the longest thing I had ever written, and my hands were shaking so hard by the end that I could barely hit send. When I finally did, I turned my phone off completely and pushed it face down under a couch cushion because I was too much of a coward to watch what happened next. When I turned it back on the next morning, the screen would not stop lighting up. 91 notifications. Ronnie had done exactly what Ronnie always does. He had taken my entire message, screenshots and all, and forwarded it straight into the family group chat, the big one with more than 30 relatives in it, without a single second of hesitation. I scrolled with my stomach somewhere around my knees. Some of them were defending my parents, of course. One of my father's cousins wrote that I was a dramatic teenager looking for attention, and that no one should believe a word of it. Another said kids these days had no respect, and this was what came of it. My father's brother, my uncle, who I had never once heard say a soft word, wrote that blood was blood, and I should be ashamed of airing this. But far more of them were not defending anyone. My Aunt Claire, my mother's oldest sister, wrote a long paragraph that made me tear up about how she had watched me disappear a little more at every family gathering for years, and had always been too afraid of my mother to ask why. A cousin I had barely spoken to since we were small said she had never once seen me at a holiday without a baby on my hip, and had simply assumed that was who I was. My Aunt Claire posted again, one line, that if the bank statements were fake, then it would be very easy for my parents to just post the real ones. My grandmother's younger sister wrote that she had loaned my parents money for an emergency 2 years back, and now wondered out loud where exactly that had gone as well. 2 cousins I had grown up with started a side thread just to tell me they believed me, and were sorry they had not seen it sooner. An older cousin, who had once lived with my parents for a summer, wrote a single sentence that landed like a stone, that she was not surprised by a word of this, and that she had left that house early for a reason no one had ever bothered to ask her about. The chat kept moving for hours, faster than anyone could keep up with, dozens and dozens of messages stacking on top of each other. My parents did not post anything. Their silence in that chat was louder than anything I could have written. And then, near the bottom of all of it, one message from my grandfather that made me sit bolt upright on Becca's couch. He had written only 4 words. Where is our money? That was the line that cracked the whole thing open, because my grandparents had never known. They had sent that money in good faith for 6 years, trusting their own son, and they had just found out at the exact same moment as 30 other people that it had been taken from the grandchild it was meant for. My grandmother called Becca's phone within the hour. She was not crying. She was somewhere past crying, in that flat, quiet place people go when they are too angry to raise their voices. She asked to speak to me, and the first thing she said was that none of this was my fault, not one bit of it. And the second thing she said was that she was going to fix it, and that I should stop worrying this instant about being a burden to anyone, because I had never once in my life been a burden to a single person. I did not know what to do with that. I had been told the opposite so many times that it had become the water I swam in. I just held the phone and listened to her breathe on the other end. My Aunt Claire called me herself the next day. She did not make any excuses. She said she was ashamed that she had spent years telling herself my exhaustion was normal, because that was easier than asking a hard question, and that she should have pulled me aside at any one of 100 family dinners and never did. She told me that if I ever needed anything at all, a ride, a meal, a place to disappear to for an afternoon, she was one phone call away, and that she meant it, not the way people usually mean it. I did not know how to accept kindness yet. I said thank you in a small voice and got off the phone quickly, but I saved her number under her actual name instead of leaving it a string of digits, which for me back then was a kind of trust I did not hand out easily. My father called me that same afternoon. I almost did not answer, and I wish now I could reach back and tell myself to trust that instinct, but I picked up. He did not say hello. He said, "You have humiliated this entire family, and as far as I am concerned, you are dead to me." His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and Becca, across the room, went completely still. He told me I had made the whole thing up, that the statements were fake, that I was a liar and a thief who had stolen the family's peace, and that I could forget about ever setting foot in his house again. I let him run himself out of air. It took a while. When he finally stopped, I said quietly, "They have your name on them, and the memo lines are in your father's handwriting, so tell me which part I faked." There was a silence on the line that told me everything everything I needed to know. Then my mother took the phone, and her voice was worse than his because it was calm and cold and completely certain. She said, "You have made your choice. Do not expect one single thing from us going forward. Not your phone, not help with school, not a place to sleep, nothing." Then the line went dead. I sat there and slowly realized that my phone itself was on their family plan, and that they had almost certainly already gone online to shut it off. Somehow, that small, petty thing was the one that finally made my hands start to shake. That night, my old number went dead. Every contact I had was locked inside that phone. Every teacher, every classmate, the 2 friends I had managed to keep. Becca sat with me, and we rebuilt what we could from memory onto the cheap prepaid, name by name. And it was in doing exactly that, listing out the tiny handful of people who actually mattered to me, that the real size of what my parents had done finally came clear. They had not just taken a house and a phone plan. They had spent years quietly making sure my whole world stayed small enough to fit inside theirs, so that leaving would feel impossible. It had very nearly worked. But sitting on that couch, typing numbers into a $40 phone, I understood that my world was small, only because they had kept it small, and that from here, it had nowhere to go, but bigger. There was one more thing Becca had taken from that office, and she told me about it that night, almost sheepishly. My parents kept an emergency credit card in the top drawer of the desk, and she had slipped it into the folder with everything else. She said it plainly. After 6 years of stolen college money and 5 years of raising their children for free, they owed me at least the price of a pair of work pants and a phone that was not on their plan. I did not want to touch it. Using it felt like turning into the exact thief they had already decided I was. But I had $40 to my name, and my first paycheck was 2 weeks out, and I needed clothes I could wear on the store floor, and a phone I could actually keep when they cut off the old one. So I used it once at a discount store across from the laundromat for 2 pairs of work pants, a cheap prepaid phone, a pack of socks, and a toothbrush. $200, almost exactly. I kept the receipt folded in my wallet like evidence, because some part of me already knew they would come for it. They did. A week later, Becca sat me down at her little kitchen table, with the look people wear right before bad news. My mother had seen the charges. She was threatening to call the police and to take Becca and me to small claims court for theft, demanding every cent back with interest. And she had left 3 voicemails that got uglier each time. In the last one, she called me a criminal and said she should have thrown me out years ago. The irony of it was so enormous that I actually laughed. A real laugh that surprised both of us. They had quietly stolen thousands of dollars from me and from their own parents, and they were going to march me into a courtroom over $200 of work pants. But underneath the laugh, I was genuinely scared. I was 17, and I had no idea what the police did with a thing like this. Whether they would show up at Becca's door, whether I had just handed my parents the one clean weapon they needed to make me the criminal in the story after all. 2 days after that, my father found out where I worked. I was on the register at Ridgeline Hardware when he came through the front doors, and I knew from the way he walked that he had not come to buy anything. He came straight to my counter, and loud enough for the whole front of the store to hear, told me I was a thief and a coward, and that he was going to make sure everyone in this town knew what I had done to my own family. He asked to speak to my manager. My hands were shaking, but before I could say anything, Owen was already there. Owen was my manager, a heavy, calm man in his 50s who had been patient with me while I learned the register and how to cut a key without ruining it. He did not raise his voice once. He just asked my father to leave, and when my father would not, he told him plainly that he was frightening the customers and that the next call was going to be to the police. And did he really want the police pulling up the details of exactly who owed money to whom in this family? My father left. He looked back at me from the door with an expression I had never seen on him before, and it took me a while to understand what it was. It was fear. For the first time in my life, he was afraid of what I knew. After he left, the store was very quiet. A regular who had been standing near the paint counter the whole time came over, an older woman I had rung up 100 times, and she did not say a single word about what she had just heard. She only told me that the store did a fine job with keys and that she would see me on Thursday, and she squeezed my arm on the way out the door. Owen put me back on the schedule for the next week like nothing had happened. He never once asked me to explain myself, and I never forgot that a stranger in a hardware apron had treated me more like family in one afternoon than my own father had in 17 years. I could not focus on anything at school that week. My friend Priya noticed something was eating me alive from the inside, and at lunch she dragged me out to the courtyard and would not let me leave until I told her the whole thing. Her mother was a lawyer, and once Priya had the story, she absolutely would not let it go until I agreed to come and talk to her. Mrs. Sethi listened to the entire thing that evening at their kitchen kitchen table, without interrupting even once, asking only for dates, for details, for exactly who had said what, and who else knew about it, and when. When I finished, she set down her pen and told me something that no adult in my life had ever bothered to say to me. She said that what my parents did was not a family disagreement that I needed to smooth over. It was neglect, and depending on a few facts, possibly something with a much worse name than that, because I was still a minor, and they were legally required to house me and support me until I turned 18, whether they liked me or not. She said no parent gets to put a child on the curb for the crime of getting a job, and as for the card, she almost smiled. She said a $200 charge on a shared family card was going to look very, very small in front of a judge, sitting right next to 6 years of gift money that vanished, and that if my parents had a competent lawyer, the very first advice that lawyer would give them was to never, ever say the word money in a courtroom again. She said if they wanted to file over the card, they should be my guest, because she would love to depose them about that folder. In the end, my parents never filed anything at all over the card. My grandfather quietly paid the $200 back into the account himself the following week, not because anyone owed it, he said, but because he wanted it gone as a thing they could ever again hold over my head, and because $200 was the cheapest lever he had ever bought back in his life. He told me to keep the receipt anyway. He said a person should always keep the receipt. Then she laid out my real options plainly, like she was talking to an adult, which almost no one ever did. I could file for emancipation and become a legal adult before I turned 18, but that would mean carrying every adult responsibility on my back while I was still trying to finish high school. The family could report my parents to child services, which might force them to take me back or might place me somewhere entirely, and it might sweep my younger siblings up into it too, which I could not stand the thought of. Or, she said, a relative could petition the court for temporary guardianship, which would let me live somewhere safe and legal without burning the entire house to the ground and dragging 4 little kids into the fire. She said that last one was the cleanest by a mile. I thanked her, and on the bus home I felt something I had not felt in as long as I could remember. I was not powerless. I had spent my whole life being treated like an adult when it was useful to them, and reminded I was only a child whenever I dared to ask for anything back. Now, for the first time, being a minor was the exact thing that was going to protect me. When I got back to Becca's apartment that night, my grandparents were sitting on her couch. For one horrible second, seeing their faces, I thought someone had died. My grandmother patted the cushion beside her and told me to sit down and stop looking so terrified. They had already spoken with Mrs. Sethi that afternoon, it turned out, and with a lawyer of their own. They wanted to petition for guardianship. They wanted me to come and live with them until I finished school, so that I would not have to work 40 hours a week and raise myself at the same time, so that I could just be a kid for whatever was left of being a kid. My grandfather cleared his throat and spoke in the flat, careful voice he used when he was holding something heavy down inside himself. He said he intended to recover every dollar he had sent for me, all 6 years of it, and that he had already told his son as much on the phone, and that I was never again going to be a person the adults in this family used up and threw away. He told me his lawyer would send a formal demand for the 6 years of transfers, itemized with the memo lines attached as exhibits, and that if my father wanted to claim the money had all been spent on me, he was welcome to produce a single receipt. My grandfather said the words "a single receipt" the way other men swing a hammer. I did not have any words. I just nodded, and my grandmother put her arm around me, and I let myself lean on someone for the first time in longer than I could count. Moving into my grandparents' house was like walking out of a building that had been quietly on fire for years, and only realizing once I was standing in the clean air outside how much smoke I had been breathing the whole time. They gave me the spare room at the end of the hall, bought me an actual bed with actual sheets, hung a curtain my grandmother picked out because she thought the color would suit me. They told me the only job I had now was to finish school. I kept a few shifts at Ridgeline anyway, because I liked having my own money in my own pocket for the first time in my life, and because Owen never once brought up the thing with my father. He just put me back on the schedule like nothing had happened. But mostly, in those first weeks, I slept. I slept like someone paying off a debt years overdue. And I studied, and for the first time in years, my grades started climbing instead of sliding, until my teachers began looking at me differently, like I had been someone else the whole time and was only now stepping into the light. There were small things that undid me more than the big ones. The first time I sat down to eat and realized I did not have to keep half an ear out for a crying child. The first weekend nobody handed me a diaper bag on the way out the door. My grandmother caught me one evening standing frozen in the kitchen at 5 o'clock, and when she asked what was wrong, I told her. Honestly, clearly that this was the hour I used to start dinner for 6, and I no longer knew what to do with my hands. She taught me to make her bread instead, slowly, badly, laughing at me the whole way through. And I think that was the first evening in years I did something with my hands that was only for me. My little sister Sadie found a way to call me almost every night, usually on a borrowed tablet, sometimes on my brother's old phone, just to tell me about her day in the breathless way 9-year-olds do. My brother Colton texted me from a cracked phone to say the house was falling apart without me, that nobody made dinner anymore, that everyone was yelling all the time, and the little ones would not stop crying at night. It broke my heart every single time, and I had to sit with the fact that I could not fix it from where I was. Mrs. Sethi had warned me about exactly this. She said I could love my siblings with my whole heart and still not walk back into that house, and that walking back in would quietly undo every protection we had just built. So I stayed where I was, and I saw the kids where I safely could, on neutral ground, at my grandparents' kitchen table on a Saturday. Never at my parents' door, never alone. My parents tried one more thing before they went quiet. One evening, Sadie called, and I could tell right away that something was different, that the words were not hers. She asked me in a small, rehearsed voice why I did not love them anymore, and whether I knew that everything was my fault, and whether I was going to come home so Mom would stop being sad. I could hear my mother breathing somewhere just off the phone. It took everything in me not to lose it. I kept my voice soft, and I told Sadie that I loved her more than anything, that none of this was hers to carry, and that if anyone ever told her again that it was her job to bring me home, she should hand the phone to a grown-up and go play. Then I heard the phone get snatched away and the call ended. I sat in my grandparents' kitchen and shook with anger for a long time, because putting a 9-year-old up to that was somehow lower than anything they had done to me directly. My grandmother sat with me and said nothing, just kept her hand on my back until my breathing came back down. After that, the calls from the little ones stopped for a while, and the silence scared me more than the calls ever had, until Colton texted me one night to say that a lady from some office had come to the house and talked to our parents at the kitchen table for a long time, and that everyone had been made to stay very quiet in their rooms. I did not know if that was true or something a frightened kid had half imagined, and I made myself not find out because I had promised Mrs. Sethi I would stay out of it and let the adults with actual standing handle what needed handling. What I did know was that the house I had held together with my own 2 hands for 5 years was coming apart the moment those hands were finally gone, and that in all 5 of those years not one person in it had ever once said thank you. Then something happened at school that I did not see coming. My English teacher, Miss Naz Okafor, kept me after class one gray afternoon and slid an essay across her desk toward me, one I had written about raising 4 children before I was old enough to drive a car. She told me it was the best piece of writing a student had handed her in years, and she asked carefully whether I had ever thought about scholarships, the kind meant for students who had come up through hard things. I had not. I had spent so long being told that college was not for people like me that I had trained myself to stop wanting it, because wanting it only ever hurt. She helped me apply anyway, to a stack of schools and a much longer stack of scholarships, and my grandparents sat with me at the kitchen table every single night, my grandmother reading every essay twice, my grandfather quietly checking every deadline against a calendar he kept taped in the hallway. The acceptance from Ashford State came first, on a Tuesday, with a partial award attached to it. I was thrilled and terrified in the same breath, because partial was not enough, and I knew it. Then, 2 weeks later, an email arrived that made the whole floor tilt. I had been named a finalist for the Holloway Merit Scholarship, the one that covered full tuition at any state university for 4 full years. If I won it, everything changed. But a week before the finalist interview, the school called my grandmother, confused because someone claiming to be my parent had contacted the scholarship office insisting I was a troubled dependent who had run away from home and could not be trusted with the award. It was my mother. She had tried to poison the one thing I had built with my own hands. My grandmother drove straight to the school with the signed guardianship order and Mrs. Sethi on speakerphone, and by the end of the afternoon, the office understood exactly who my legal guardians were and exactly what my parents were. They apologized to me twice. I realized, walking out of that office, that my mother would rather sink my future than watch me have one she could not take credit for. I sat for the finalist interview in a borrowed blazer my grandmother had steamed the night before, in front of 5 people with more degrees between them than my entire family had ever held, and I talked, plainly and without dressing it up, about what it had cost me to raise a family before I was old enough to have one of my own. One of them asked me what I intended to study, and I said I wanted to work with kids in family court and foster care, because I had learned very young exactly how invisible a child could become inside inside their own home, and I did not want another kid to have to wait for a cousin with a folder before anyone would believe them. The room went quiet after that, the kind of quiet that told me nothing about whether I had passed. I walked out with no idea whether I had done well or made a fool of myself. The waiting took 2 weeks, and they were the 2 longest weeks of my life. I checked my email so many times a day that my grandfather finally, gently, took my phone out of my hand and set it on the counter and told me to come help him in the garden until the world made up its mind. We spent those 2 weeks the way I imagine ordinary families spend their time, which was so foreign to me that I kept bracing for the bill to come due. My grandfather taught me the names of his tomatoes and how to tell which ones were lying about being ripe. My grandmother made me read my finalist essay out loud one evening at dinner, and when I got to the part about the twins, she had to get up and leave the table for a minute, and my grandfather reached over and gripped my shoulder without a single word. I had spent 17 years learning that love always arrived with an invoice attached to it. It took a garden, a loaf of badly made bread, and 2 old people who asked me for nothing to begin teaching me that sometimes it simply does not. It made up its mind on a gray Thursday afternoon at that same kitchen table while I was pretending to do homework. My phone lit up with the subject line I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly open it. My grandmother saw my face and came to stand behind me with a steadying hand on my shoulder. I read the first line 3 times before I let myself believe it. Full tuition. 4 years, I had won. I put my head down on the table and I cried, and this time it was not the kind of crying my parents had taught me, and my grandmother was crying into my hair, and my grandfather came in from the garage still holding a wrench, saw the 2 of us, and just stood in the doorway with his free hand pressed over his mouth. That night, for the first time, I let myself picture a future that had actually come loose from that house, and it did not disappear when I looked straight at it. The knock on my grandparents' door came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks before my graduation. I opened it, and my mother was standing on the step. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and for one foolish second, the boy in me who never fully died thought she had come to say she was sorry. She had not. She stepped inside without waiting to be asked, walked past me, and sat down at the very table where I had filled out every one of my scholarship forms. She told me it was time to stop all this nonsense and come home. The replacement babysitter, she said, had quit after 8 days. 4 kids under 10 had been too much for the girl, the way 4 kids under 10 had always been too much, except that I had never once been allowed to quit. The house was chaos. My father had picked up extra shifts and was never home. My grandparents had cut them off completely, and the lawyer's letter about the 6 years of money had frightened them badly. She could not do it by herself. She needed me. That was the word she used. Needed. Not missed. Not sorry. Needed. When I did not answer right away, she reached for her other tools. She reminded me that I was still their child, that family does not abandon family, using the exact words she had used on me on the night she set me on the porch. When guilt did not land, she went to anger and told me my grandparents were only using me to punish her, that they had never really loved her, that I was a pawn and too stupid to see it. When anger did not land either, she went quiet, and for a moment I watched her actually calculate, scanning my face to find the lever that still worked. There was not one left. That, I think, more than the money or the family chat or any of it, was the thing about me she would never forgive. I looked at this woman, the woman who had put my clothes in a garbage bag at 2 in the morning and turned off the porch light behind me, the woman who had told 30 relatives I was a liar looking for attention, the woman who had spent 6 years of my grandparents' money on herself, who had put a birthday card meant for me in a drawer and cashed the check inside, who had put a rehearsed apology in the mouth of a 9-year-old, who had tried to have me arrested over $200 of work pants and tried to burn down my scholarship out of pure spite. And I understood finally and all the way down that she had not come to my grandparents' door because anything inside her had changed. She had come because her free labor had walked out and she wanted it back on the shelf. So I told her the truth, calmly, the way Mrs. Sethi had taught me to talk when it mattered most. I told her I was not coming home, not that afternoon, not ever. I told her the guardianship was already final, signed by a judge. I told her I started at Ashford State in the fall on a full scholarship, that she had done absolutely nothing to earn for me, that no one in that house had lifted a single finger toward. I told her my grandfather's lawyer had already sent the letter about 6 years of money that had my name written on it, and none of it in my hands, and that the whole family knew exactly who I was now, and exactly who she was, and that no story she told from here on out was ever going to fit back inside the box she had kept it in. Then I stood up, and I walked to the door I had once been thrown out of, and I opened it, and I said to her the same 3 words my father had said to me on the night they ended us. Figure it out. She did not move for a long moment. Then she picked her keys up off my grandparents' table, the same slow way I had once picked that garbage bag up off the porch, and she walked out past me into the afternoon. I shut the door behind her, and I stood there in the quiet, and I waited to feel the thing I had always felt after them, the grief, the ache, the small boy still hoping. It did not come. For the first time in my whole life, when it came to my parents, I had absolutely nothing left to grieve.